Hello, hello. Welcome to our South Africa trip and the longest day maybe ever. We had flown down the day before from Seattle, and then we flew out of Dallas the next day to stop in Doha. And this was a 15-hour flight, but we had this really cool view on the Qatar Airways plane of takeoff and landing. And then we had several hours in the Doha airport, but this was probably the biggest airport I've ever been in. It had lots of cool shops, and they also had this really cool indoor forest in one of their terminals. Then after our layover, we got back on the plane and got on another 10-hour flight to Cape Town. Then once we arrived in Cape Town, we went straight to our hotel, which was called the Mount Nelson, and they had this really gorgeous pink theme that was started after the First World War. We got settled in, had a couple meals, including the reception dinner with our travel group, and after 5 courses, we headed down to a really good night's rest. Day 2, we were rested up and ready to go. We had breakfast at the beautiful restaurant on the hotel property and heard from Christo Brandt, who was the jailer of Nelson Mandela. Then our first stop of the day was going to Signal Hill, which had these great views of Table Mountain as well as the Valley of Cape Town, and it let us see some things like Robben Island, which was where Nelson Mandela was jailed. We saw lots of great things, including these cool helmeted guinea fowl. This was our first taste of animals for the trip. We drove back down, and our next stop was the Kirstenbosch Gardens, where we learned about the fynbos that's there, which is specifically vegetation in and around the Cape area of South Africa. So it was really cool to learn about. And then we got lunch at this restaurant within the gardens, and this lady came by and offered to paint our faces during the meal, which was super fun and added a really nice touch to the midday. After that, we spent our afternoon at the Victoria and Alfred waterfront, which had these really great shops, waterfront views, and even this huge seal that was taking a nap. So we got to walk around there, and we also got to see this group that was performing there. That evening, we went to the Constantia Winelands, where we had this wine pairing dinner, and each course was paired with a different type of wine. I'm not a huge wine fan, but it was a really great experience and really good food, and the perfect way to end night 2. Day 3 was our final day in Cape Town, and we took the day to drive down to the Cape of Good Hope. The whole drive had a bunch of views all the way down, and we ended up coming across this vendor who was selling these traditionally beaded South African trinkets, and we bought one. We continued with the drive that just went right along the coast, and it was absolutely beautiful. At one point, we came across an ostrich on the side of the road, which was pretty cool. Then our next stop was the Cape of Good Hope, which is the most southwestern point of the African continent. There were some huge waves down at the bottom, and then we had the chance to climb up towards this abandoned lighthouse at the Cape. The entire climb had these great views, and at the top we reached the lighthouse that offered these 360-degree views of the entire Cape. On our way down, we encountered some eland, which we took as a good omen for the next part of our trip, along with some baboons who were just wandering in the road. For lunch, we went to the Seaforth restaurant, which had these great window views of the beach that was right outside. I got this massive seafood plate for lunch, and it was so good. And dessert was malva pudding, which is kind of like a South African bread pudding. After that, we went to go see the penguin colony. They were so cute, and it was really cool to see penguins outside of an Arctic environment. That evening, we drove home, had dinner just with our families by ourselves. For For dessert, we had some of the dates that we got in the Doha airport, and we prepared ourselves for the next chapter of our journey. Day 4 started, and we were super excited because we were flying into the Skukuza airport. We said goodbye to Table Mountain, and after a 2.5-hour flight, we landed in Skukuza. And here's a video of our super rough landing that actually glitched Joel's phone because it was so hard. But we arrived at the airport, and it was one of the cutest airports I have ever seen. It even had some bats hanging out at the very top. We were picked up in a safari car and driven to our hotel, and immediately outside of the airport, we saw some wildlife. And here's some Enyala, which are some of the bigger deer-like creatures. The drive was beautiful, and it was so different from Cape Town. Immediately, we were just breathtaking with everything. At one point, we saw some impala, which is one of the most common deer creatures that we saw out there. Then we arrived at our hotel, and this was one of the coolest places ever. It was super open air, and at the back of the main lodge, they had this viewing deck where you could look for animals even while you weren't on safari. We had our first meal sitting outside, and I was still blown away by how peaceful, serene, and well put together this place was. And then the lunch was delicious as well. This was only the start, but all of the food here was so yummy, and we were so excited for all the wildlife. I even had the shot of a lizard alongside a water buffalo. And even inside our hotel, everything was just so well put together. They welcomed us with our names and everything. Outside on the back porch, we had some chairs to lounge in, along with a plunge pool so we could look for animals from our room as well. And the entire house itself was just this one-bedroom place for you to stay, find some relaxation in between safaris. Then our safari started, and we came across the first of the big 5, which were elephants, and there are even closer shots that come later. We found a kingfisher on a tree alongside some starling, and they have this beautiful shimmery coat of feathers. I tried getting this shot of some hippo along the way through binoculars, didn't work out so well. But then we saw a giraffe along the way who was right next to our car. And then I got this much better shot of an elephant walking in the sunset. Then we had our own surprise, and we came across this leopard eating its kill up in a tree. It had killed a bushbuck maybe a few days ago and was still munching on it from up in the tree. And one of the coolest parts was that there was a hyena at the bottom who was waiting for any scraps, and at one point the jaguar bit the head off of the bushbuck, and the hyena had its meal for the day. Here's the jaguar climbing down the tree, pretty full for now, and it actually went and found a male jaguar, and they started mating, which I did not keep filming after that. But we had a great sunset, as well as our first dinner on safari, and everything was just so yummy. It ended the perfect day, and we were so excited for the next day. Day 5 started bright and early with a 6 a.m. wake-up call and a sighting of a hippo. We were able to watch the sunrise from our vehicle, and it was super cold at the very start, but it warmed up pretty quickly. We first came across some young male impala who were play fighting, practicing. Then we came across another giraffe. And we got to see a water buffalo, which combined with the elephants and the leopard from day 1 made 3 out of the big 5. At one point, we stopped and came across a huge hippo skull, which was just massive, and it was really fun getting to stick our heads in and compare ourselves to it. And after that, we crossed paths with the 4th of the big 5, which were lions. There was one male and a couple females, and we ended up going off-road to try to track them to see where they'd end up. We were running over bushes and trees and ducking out of the way, trying to avoid getting hit. And at one point we were trying to go over this tree, but our car ended up getting stuck. So we all had to hop out while our ranger Murray freed the car, which he successfully did here. We quickly hopped back in and were able to track down the lions again. And they had settled into a mid-morning cat nap. Pretty much right after that, we rounded out the big five with some white rhino. And these things were so cool to see. There were a bunch of females and one massive male that was with them, and they were just walking around, grazing in the late morning. And as we were heading back, we saw a wildebeest that was having its morning snack. We had our own breakfast back at the lodge and spent most of that mid-morning and early afternoon just getting to view things from our balcony and relaxing. That afternoon, we had a couple of snacks before heading out on our evening safari. And first we spotted some kudu, which have these really spirally horns, and their image is the logo for the Kruger National Park. After that, we saw another giraffe, and then we were able to find the lions from this morning. They had chosen a new spot to relax. We chose our own spot to have some evening drinks and snacks, and then we went to an outdoor dinner, which was a large braai, which is like a South African barbecue, and we ended the night with some really yummy food. Day 6 marked our halfway point of the trip and our last morning in the Kruger National Park, but we made the most of it by seeing some more water buffalo and a huge group of elephants that were pretty active in the morning. And we even saw a mom elephant with her little baby that was hiding right behind her. We then got water level with some hippo, and they were just staring at us from the water the whole time. It was pretty scary, but we also saw some baby hippo in there, and they were pretty cute. Saw yet another giraffe. I'm just realizing how much giraffe was on this trip. And then we came across some black-faced vervet monkeys hanging from the trees. As always, had a super yummy breakfast at the lodge, and then we packed up to go to the Sabi Sands lodge. But this did not disappoint at all, because as soon as we got there, we saw this huge herd of elephants flocking to the water hole that was like in the lodge's backyard. And right next to them was a big group of zebras and even a tiny little warthog that was hanging out with them. Once we got to our room, we happened to see a female Nyala just hanging out outside of our back window. And on our evening safari, we found a group of mongooses, which were so cute. They just hang out in abandoned termite mounds, and they were just so tiny and adorable. We passed by a water buck, which was another deer that we found. And then we saw a different group of lions. This one had cubs, and these cubs were just snacking on a wildebeest carcass. We ended up driving down this random airport runway, and at one point when Joel was trying to film me, his hat flew all the way off his head, and we had to turn around and get it for him from the tarmac. We gave him a pretty tough time about this one. But after the hat was gathered, we found this really nice outcropping of rocks where we set up our evening drink and snack stand. We had dinner, and on our way back to the lodge, we found this mother and baby elephant hanging out in the dark. Day 7 was our last full day on safari, and we started out by seeing this leopard who had just narrowly missed a warthog coming out of its hiding hole. So that's what it was looking for there. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to capture it. Later on, we crossed paths with a large group of elephants who were just walking past us to try to get to more food. And after that, we found a pair of white rhino that were just kind of huddled together, and they were really cute. And we saw this thing called a pangolin, which is kind of like an armadillo, but it was super scaly and just so weird to look at. That afternoon, we went on a nature walk, and Joel got to demonstrate how a length of a human stride was about the distance between his shoulders and his feet, which was super funny to be able to watch. That evening, we ended our last night on safari by getting together with our tour group, watching the sunset, and we finished it off with a dung spitting contest. We got pieces of impala dung, put it in our mouths, and tried to see how far we could spit it. Impala dung is pretty much just processed grass, so it's not necessarily bad for you. But it was super fun to see everyone participate and see how far they could spit dung. That evening, after dinner, on our way back, we ended up finding a leopard on the hunt. It didn't catch anything, but it was super cool to see it at night. We finished our last morning in the safari by seeing so many buffalo, and I even got this video of the lilac-breasted roller, which was super special. For breakfast, we got an ostrich egg, not all of it because it's equivalent to 26 normal chicken eggs. But then we were back at the airport, had a whole travel day, then arrived in Johannesburg at the Fairlawns Hotel. It was super quaint and quiet, especially for being in the city, and it was very nice. And then we had another 5-course dinner with so much food, and it was all so tasty. Here I got the calamari, and for my main dish I had this epic plate of seafood pasta. It was so good. And dessert was this tiramisu cheesecake. So for a travel day, it was pretty good. Day 9 was our day to explore Johannesburg, and we started out by passing by Nelson Mandela's house. Right after that, we went to the Apartheid Museum, and I couldn't take any footage inside, but it was super touching and really well done. Right after that, we went to the Constitutional Court, which was unlike anything I had ever seen before. We had a really great presentation about their justice system and how it's set up in South Africa. After that, we went to the Sandton Mall, which had Nelson Mandela Square in it, and the mall itself was huge. I would have gotten lost for sure. That evening, we went to Marble, which was this Michelin star restaurant. We got to watch the sunset, and it was a great way to wrap up one of our last nights on the trip. Day 10 was yet another travel day. We started out with breakfast at the hotel and check out this epic shot of this Eggs Benedict. We hopped on another quick flight, and then we landed at the Victoria Falls National Airport in Zimbabwe. We got on our bus and were driven directly to a sunset cruise on the Zambezi River. We heard a great presentation about Dr. Livingstone, had some snacks while on board, and got to watch the sunset on the river, which was just beautiful. We eventually made it to the hotel, and we were ready for dinner. And it was super fun because we got to watch sort of a dinner and a show. It started out with some guys playing the xylophone. And then eventually there was a bigger group that performed as we ate dinner. It was super cool to see all these different talents and people that were performing, but probably the best part of it all was this couple who was honeymooning on our trip ended up getting serenaded by the performing group. It was super fun, and even other members of our group joined the fun. At one point, they called everyone up from our group to join them, but only Joel and I went up there. So here we are dancing with everybody else. And eventually we formed a big line and went around the entire outdoor restaurant. But it was such a fun experience and an awesome way to end day 10. Day 11 was our last full day of vacation, and we spent the day going to explore Victoria Falls. First, we got to see the sunrise from the hotel, which was just super pretty, and we could see the smoke coming from the falls in the background. And then we were there, standing at the edge of Victoria Falls, and it was even more epic than I thought it was going to be. There are 5 different waterfalls. Each of them are so full with water. and they were just so huge. Victoria Falls is considered the largest waterfall in the world, not by height or by width, but with the two combined, it has the largest dimensions of any waterfall. We walked this really nice path between each outlook point, and there were about 16 points to look out from, which was super cool to get to see each part of the falls from a different perspective along the way. Everything was super wet out there. There was this upsplash from all the water, and it felt like rain when it was coming back down just because of how powerful the falls were. We got to look down into the basin, and we even saw a boat that was touring around down there, and the views from the top were just beautiful. It was amazing. We also got to see the train tracks that were built for the Queen back in the day, not in operation anymore. And then we made our way from the falls, and along the way to our next destination, we saw a baobab tree, and this one was just huge. It was pretty massive for a tree. Our next stop was the elephant sanctuary, which was super cool. We got to meet 6 different elephants, and they were all just hanging out, having fun, happy to be there. We got to take pictures with them and pet them, and we even saw this really cute tiny one who was just having so much fun spraying water around. The next fun part of the sanctuary was getting to feed the elephants, which was really cool because there were 2 different ways you could feed them. One was putting the food into their trunk and they would feed themselves, like you see here. And the other way was to throw the food directly in the elephant's mouth, which I felt like was scarier, but was just as cool. We had a quick group shot of our entire travel group, which was really fun because after 11 days, they were all really special to us. Then back at the hotel, we took the afternoon to have some tea time, and this was the real deal. This was the full cup of tea, 3 tiers of food, and all of it was so yummy, but we were just so full from eating the entire trip. But as the sun started to set, we got to watch the bridge from the other side, the hotel side. And then we had our final farewell dinner, which was so sad, but just like everything else on that trip, was delicious. Day 12 wrapped up our trip. We had our last breakfast at the hotel, which was so wonderful. Then we headed straight to the airport to fly back to Johannesburg and then board our long flight home. It was such a wonderful trip, and I would recommend it to anybody, and I would love to go back. So thanks so much for tuning in.